welcome to the Scene World podcast with Martin and Jörg.
On the other side, yes.
Yes. AJ is at the moment not available for this news bit, so Martin is taking over.
Yeah.
So, news. Well, before we start with the news, we're actually talking to Anthony and Nicola Caulfield, and they are both known to be documentary experts. And they, for some years ago, they released the very much known From Bedroom to Billions documentary about the game development scene from Great Britain from the 80s, 90s. And then a few years later, they did the Amiga Years. And now they are actually running a Kickstarter for the Spectrum, the ZX Spectrum gaming scene, gaming development scene from the 80s and 90s. And they also said that if you are a listener to the Scene World podcast and you back them in the Kickstarter and you write an email to them telling them that you heard about the Kickstarter in the Scene World podcast, you can take part in a competition and perhaps you get some goodies if you are lucky.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, that's pretty nice. So we will write details about that in the video version. And also write it down in the link list. So don't miss it. Write to them if you listen to this. So before we start, some news. Well, for once, David Pleasance released his book from... good question. I have it actually here. It's called From Vultures to Vampires.
Yeah.
And David Pleasance, we interviewed a couple of podcasts ago when he was about to write this book, and he actually wrote this book, finished it, and shipped this last week. So that's very nice. And also one of our other recent podcasts, where Chris Abbott, the Little Book of Sound Chips, Volume 1. As we know, Volume 2 and Volume 3 are already written, and they are soon on the crowdfunding as well. So right now you can get the first book. And it was very convenient. I could pick them up in the same week from the post office and pay the income VAT.
So you got them from the Kickstarter. So, or where did you get the books from?
Yes, the From Vultures to Vampires was a Kickstarter.
Uh-huh.
And the Little Book of Sound Shapes was from Chris Wilkins, and he had his own crowdfunding platform, own crowdfunding campaign, not Kickstarter, not Indiegogo, but his own crowdfunding system. Yeah.
So if you want to get the book now, where can you get it?
Well, I mean, Chris Wilkins has his Ritual Fusion shop. I guess
sure.
You can get some copies from there. Chris Abbott is working with Chris Wilkins. Chris Wilkins is the publisher. Chris Abbott is the author. And David Pleasance currently also has a few copies left to sell. So I guess even if you missed the two crowdfunding campaigns, you can still get the books.
That's good.
Yeah, that's very, very neat. Or if the postman lost it or drove over it with the parcel delivery truck or something. I wouldn't believe it. Last Christmas, I bought a wooden disc box.
Yeah.
And there were boot and tire marks on the outside of the parcel.
I believe you a lot because I bought a Laserdisc by myself last Christmas, and when it came, I just thought, oh, this looks like some tire squeaks there, and yeah, the disc was broken in two pieces.
Oh, yeah. Fortunately, it was a wooden box, and it was packed to the side,
okay.
So not upside. So it was sideways. So it was stable and withstand
Excellent.
The force of the tire and the boot. Yeah. And the interesting thing is that the delivery guy, of course, held it this way that when he gave it to me, I couldn't see it, you know? Ooh, smart, right?
Yes.
Yes. Well, other news. Yeah, well, other news are that the Kickstarter of Watermelon Games of Paprium is actually going very well. It surpassed 500,000.
Oh,
Yes, yes. And today, so if you listen to or watched this yesterday, they announced the Grandstick 4, the follow-up of the arcade stick, of the famous arcade stick, which is nice because I mentioned it 3 times in our interview with Quinnell, our last interview with Quinnell, that we really would like to see the Grandstick getting a re-release. So that seems to happen. And, he also announced a Switch version of the Paprium game and a mini Paprium for the Game Gear.
or the Game Gear, yeah.
Or Game Gear, as he said, because he said next gen.
That makes sense, yes.
because people were like, since when is Game Gear next gen? Isn't really. Right.
Well, it was.
It was back then, yes. It was back then. Better than the Game Boy, but twice as expensive, at least in Germany.
Yes.
And this is why my parents said, no, we are not going to buy you a Game Gear. You have to stick with the olive green monochrome Game Boy. Yeah. Yeah. And nowadays it's like the Game Gear is very expensive and you hardly can get a working one for good money, but the games nobody wants for some reason. So you can get the cartridge cheap, but the main problem is getting the system in a running state at first. Okay. So, yeah. Well, and other news. Well, Petro Planas, our Venezuelan guest that we talked last year with about the Venezuelan retro gaming scene, which isn't really officially a thing because video games are illegal in the country, in case you didn't know. It's quite interesting, yes. Video game development is illegal in Venezuela. So they put a lot of CEOs and people working for video game industry in prison, and actually the most studios from Venezuela actually moved to Colombia because in Colombia it isn't illegal to produce video games. Yeah. So if you want to hear about that, perhaps you should listen back to our Venezuelan podcast episode because it's a crazy story.
I really will. I promise I will listen to it very soon because this is the first time I hear about it, and that's unbelievable.
That is why we had him as a guest, because it was like, this is interesting. We want to talk about that, and he actually is active on YouTube again, and he is actually making remixes about retro gaming themes, not scenes, themes, and he just released yesterday his new YouTube video. So, way to go. Well, and last but not least, Tronimal, Jörg Rittershaus, the famous Game Boy composer, last week shipped and released his DRP, Digital Retro Park soundtrack.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So a lot of things is happening. Everybody's pushing out his product before Christmas.
Yeah.
that time of the year.
So we'll have a lot of under the Christmas tree then.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. That would be it. So I would say let's jump over to the couple and let's talk AJ and me, and Martin will jump back to his cellar.
I will.
And wait for the next time he is requested. See you then. Bye.
Bye.
We are talking to Nicola and Anthony Caulfield, and you are the couple actually known for doing the documentary originally From Bedroom to Billions.
I grew up with the Commodore 64, you see. So Nicola's...
Me too.
Yeah.
Oh, she did the Spectrum, and you did the Commodore 64. Okay, okay,
Oh, okay.
interesting.
In fact, I have
Oh,
it.
there it is.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, my
Nice.
Commodore 64 is over there in the corner. I don't know if you can see it from
I
there.
think I see an Amiga from
Yeah,
an
it's an
Amiga.
Amiga. The Commodore 64 is just
Oh, yeah.
there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the old what was it called?
Oh, what, like the keyboard?
Yeah, my dad worked for a company that made them.
Oh,
That's how I got my Commodore 64.
awesome.
Because he worked for a company called Music Sales in the early 1980s that had a contract with Commodore to produce music software. So my dad was their chief salesman, and I was from a family. We didn't have enough money for a home computer at that point. And when he started working there, I asked him on the first day. I said, can I have any chance you could get a Commodore 16? Because I think the Commodore 16 had just come out, because I didn't think there was any chance of getting the 64. And he came home that night with the 64, the disk drive, the monitor, everything's here. Monitor's there, disk drive's down.
Nice.
And the only thing he didn't bring was a cassette deck.
Well, you lucked out then.
Yeah, it was a big problem. It was a big problem because disk software obviously was so much more expensive and
But
much more difficult.
Typing it in would be faster than actually loading it off a tape.
Yeah, absolutely.
That depends. I mean, the newer games actually had a fast loading system, and that is what many people discredit, and but I mean, UK is a different beast here anyway, because UK was the only country where people actually prefer tape over diskettes,
I don't know.
At least for the Commodore 64.
I wouldn't call it prefer.
Yeah.
Was just cheaper, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, the expense of what were they? They were the actual 1541 was actually more expensive, wasn't it, than the computer itself?
Yeah, right.
So it just, but I was very lucky because Dad came home with. I think you probably just sit down there. Dad came home with one, and then I remember realizing I'd have to find so much more money to buy disc games, and there was so much harder to find.
Talking about the British side of the game industry,
I have
right.
one. Oh, hey now.
The rarest one, yeah. It's sorry, I didn't mean to immediately plug. In fact, it's not wrapped in cellophane. But yeah,
hey, that's what we're here for.
This was the one that is extremely rare because it comes with a reversible cover. Ooh. And they are. This is the only copy I've got of it, and so I get asked for a copy at least several times a month. They are the thing that basically became very rare off our original Kickstarter. So
I mean, this documentary actually shaped this demo scene and the retro gaming scene in a way, because it was the first documentary of its kind.
Wow, I suppose it was, wasn't it?
It probably was, yeah.
Yeah. So
and it kind of it really grew, because we initially sat there and thought, oh, we'll do maybe a film about 90 minutes long. Didn't quite know the story we were going to tell, but then as we started interviewing more and more people, more and more stories kept coming out, and we thought, oh, we'll have to talk about that, and before we knew it, we had a 2.5 hour film. And I mean, the initial timeline that we did was running at about 10 hours. I mean, we have so much material, and now that we've done 3 films, we've got 265 hours?
Nearly just under 300 hours of stuff.
Of footage we've not really used.
Wow.
So,
I've read somewhere that the author of Jet Set Willy was the hardest to get. I don't remember his name right now. It's totally fell. Pardon?
Matthew Smith, which I've got. Sorry, I'm not trying to be flash.
He's just whipping out props.
Be flash. The props are great.
See, that's Matthew Smith. It's Jet Set Willy. That's a software. Well, it was only software projects version of it. Yes, that's right. He was extremely hard to get, and he was.
He was lovely. He doesn't do
very
many
private.
interviews. Very private. And we had a really lovely time with him. We were there for like most of the day, and it was just really nice to chat with him, because so many people had said, oh, he's such a lovely guy if you get to meet him and everything. And yeah, it was nice, wasn't it?
It was. I think when we were making that original film, I think there was what surprised me. I mean, I was going to show you this. I know you had Andrew Fisher on, but this is kind of what
started. Of course, yes.
He's one of our.
I was
so
surprised. I was so surprised that he actually wrote a dedication to me in the foreword of that book.
Well, that's the thing. This book, which I like to plug Andrew Fisher whenever I can, because I have told him this, and he's I don't want to say shy, but he's very, very nice about the way he takes it. But I bought this book because I was obviously, just like everybody else, a fan of the Commodore 64 from being a child, and wasn't really part of any form of scene or Facebook group or anything like that. So when I saw this book, I had to have it. I had to get it, read it, and then discovered Retro Gamer because Andrew contributed. And it kind of went on. And then I went and spoke with Retro Gamer. I was talking to Darren Jones, actually, of Retro Gamer, only the other day about this, because we've known each other now for like 13 years. And I remember going to see him in about 2007, 2008. And I said, do you think there's any appetite for a film about retro games? And I have to say, I've always had a problem with using that term retro games, because if you listen to the Beatles or something, you don't sort of say you're going off to listen to retro music. It's just you're going off to listen to music. But I think for the purpose of this conversation, you get what I mean. And went to see Darren, and he said, absolutely, we've got a readership. There's a growing community of people, and it never went away. I always say that about Chris Abbott. Chris Abbott was there during the really barren years. He kept that flame alive, and others like him during those really, really barren years. And and then but nothing ever came of that particular project with Retro Gamer, because the company we were working with, EMI, suddenly went into all this financial trouble in 2008, and it kind of went quiet. And then I think it never went away, and it was an idea on a piece of paper, story of games industry sort of thing, not necessarily the UK. And then over the next year or two, we discovered the whole idea of crowdfunding and refining the idea a little bit, and thought, why don't we just find out what happened to the British games industry? And we genuinely didn't know. We didn't know the answer. It wasn't like we secretly knew. We'd read a book or stolen the idea off somebody. It was just what actually, what was it like to experience living through the British games industry from the voices themselves of those that were part of it. And that's where it came from. And we had originally we approached Daniel Craig to do the narration for the film, and his agent didn't say no. Said, might be interested. So we were sort of, wouldn't that be amazing having James Bond as the narrator? And then as it went on, not that he said yes, just to make it absolutely clear. It wasn't like a yes.
It was kind of come back when you've got something more.
He might be interested.
Together.
So we sort of thought, and then we went away and we shot, edited it, shot a bit more, edited it, and then we started to feel it was working better as an ensemble, which, you're not using a narration, which is a nightmare to edit. It's an absolute nightmare to edit something where you have no narration. And you do see it, and we'd never done anything like that before, not just with no narration. And it just sort of grew out, didn't it? It was very, very much an evolving project.
It's very, very complicated not using voiceover, because you have to make sure everyone's you can tell the story through obviously what they're saying. You've got can't just say, we've got no one saying that, what do we do? So we had to make sure we had everything covered when we were doing all the interviews. But because we were so thorough with the amount of interviews that we did, it all kind of worked. But everyone was so lovely. It was so nice. And we did so many interviews where they'd go on to 2 or 3 hours, because I don't think many of them hadn't been interviewed for so long. So it was really nice to sit there and learn their whole life story from where they started to where they were at that particular time. It was great, wasn't it?
Rob Hubbard, I think, said no 4 times. And it was just, someone asked him a 5th time.
And now Rob Hubbard says yes to everything because he likes to be interviewed and stuff.
I love that. We've had that kind of the same experience with people where they really want to talk about their lives and whatnot, and a lot of people haven't asked them these things, or they haven't been asked this stuff in a long time. So you sit down and say, we usually have our podcasts span about an hour, but I mean the stuff we've got in the archives that we had to remove, that is just amazing stuff.
Yeah. And you've interviewed some really amazing people. Roy Schultz as well. I was most impressed.
To get in reaction took 4 years or something, because many people just even don't reply to emails anymore or something.
Yeah.
So that's Roy Schultz was a special complicated kind.
Yeah.
Yes. It's an interesting. He's certainly an interesting guest, and can certainly talk a lot about Twin Galaxies and and competitive gaming. We interviewed Tony Temple once, And he said, I love Roy, but sometimes when I'm playing and it's a dark, you know, like, is he going to be behind me? What's going to, you know, just how competitive is he really? You know, does he really want no competition? So yeah, it's I love competitive gaming. I mean, that was another thing. We kind of did these short films for Atari in 2010, sort of a couple of years before we even started From Bedrooms to Billions. On I think Atari had just changed hands again, and the company were trying to sort of beef up their image, and we kind of sort of suggested some like history of I think it was Yar's Revenge and Missile Command and a couple of classic Atari titles, and we made these short films which never got released because Atari kind of imploded. So we sort of thought that was a shame, and when we did those, we met Paul Drury and Archer McLean while we were making those shorts. So when we then had the idea of Nicola, I believe Nicola was the one that came up with the name From Bedrooms to Billions. When we decided we were going to tell the story of the British games industry, we came up with a rough list, and then I remember having a long chat with Paul Drury and Archer McLean and a few other people about who would you like to see in such a film, and then I think we drew up 12 interviews or 15 interviews, and then it became 20, and then 25, and then 30. But it was done in clumps of filming, as I was saying earlier. So you sort of shoot, edit a bit, see what you've got, and move on. It's not really actually. It's not the most budget-friendly way of making a documentary, but it's a sort of way you do it when you don't know the answer. So if you go into it with a preconceived idea, right, this is the story I want to tell, this is the conclusion I'm going to want, blah, 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 you can pretty much just hire a couple of locations, get everybody to turn up, pretty much get them to say what you want, within reason. I'm not suggesting you put words in it, and then you come away and you can edit it very, very quickly. With From Bedrooms, there was so many different opinions, we needed to keep interviewing to eventually get to a point when we thought we had a sort of a general consensus almost of what happened. And the big one was what happened in the early 1990s, because we were looking at Companies House and other research we were doing. We were noticing all these British companies just disappearing, just vanishing, going bust or being bought. And we kind of wanted to understand the reason for that. And obviously you can watch the film to fully glean that. But second film was, sorry, Karen.
There are some exceptions. I mean, Husen Software, for example, is still around now as Hui Software. Huey, exactly.
Yeah.
By his son. So
that's right.
He is taking the torch there, and
I wasn't suggesting, by the way, that everybody died out or anything. I was merely just saying, obviously, as consumers growing up through the 80s, you know, we were buying game, and it seemed like there was obviously that.
Well, the industry evolved. Didn't it? It's, you know, to what it is now, and it just changed.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So they got
inevitably
up, and it's just the way it goes, I guess. But I mean, in terms of interviewing people, it got quite complicated by the time we got to the PlayStation revolution, because then obviously we were interviewing people in Japan and in America, and all of them were pretty much very active still within the games industry.
Right.
So in terms of locking people down, and certainly in terms of Japan, it's very complicated because you have to go through all the different levels within the companies and everything. But we got some fantastic names for that. But that would be one interview. You couldn't clump them together. It was generally one interview, and then a month later you'd be able to get someone else. And then America, it was very hard to put groups of people together because they were so spread out. You know, some were in such remote places, some of them. And we had crews that we were working with out there because it just wouldn't have been cost effective for us to be able to go out there. We'd have been out there for years.
Yeah, it meant we could spend more money on the actual film itself.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, a lot of pretty much all the interviews From Bedrooms we shot ourselves.
Yeah.
Amiga Years was probably about 40%, and the rest were external crews, because there's a lot of Americans in the and Canadians in the Amiga Years.
So it was all remote, wasn't it? We were
That's right.
on little screens in their front rooms or wherever.
And that's funny too, because you know, the Amiga, as an American, I never even saw an Amiga until just a few years ago, and never had one. I wanted one, but they just weren't a thing where I was.
Yeah.
No, it was a European. Once they redesigned the original A1000 into the A500 and got it more sort of what you would consider, I will be murdered for this, Commodore friendly. effectively getting it into a sort of 1:8 like case. And we can get the production cost down and everything. Europe seemed to thrive. Obviously Germany, the UK, there was obviously certain countries where they just grabbed onto it. And of course, what fascinated us with the Amiga when we were making From Bedrooms to Billions, and some people ask us this, why did we do the Amiga Years next, was we were realizing that a lot of people were using the Amiga as a development machine. They were designing graphics for all sorts of other platforms. That obviously migrated eventually to the PC, because really the A1000 was like a PC 10 years early. But that's, well, it might be the right place to say this. But so they realised that I think once the A500 started to take off, it did become a more of a European thing, because obviously the consoles were leading the way a lot in the US.
Yeah.
There was a healthy computer market for quite some time in the US.
Yeah, and then everything, as far as gaming, a lot of gaming switched over to consoles. So that home computer market that was dominated by the Amiga and the Atari and stuff, like my history, like I went straight from 8-bit to a Mac, and there was no in between. There was no 16-bit Amiga or Atari era. They just never occurred.
But of course, the Commodore 64 was fairly ginormous in the US.
Yes, that was yeah.
As was the Atari 800, though not as much as, but it also established a fairly healthy computer base in the US, didn't it? With that, and the Apple II was always, it was very popular, but it was always priced so much higher, wasn't it? It was always, it took a while for that to come down a bit. But even the Atari 800 was $1,000, I think, when it first came out. It might be a couple of,
wow.
I might be a couple of hundred out there, but I think it's certainly upwards of $1,000. So the idea of eventually the Commodore 64 being so cheap was also helped by the ZX Spectrum, this machine here we're going to be talking about soon in our new film. Because
every time I'm near a Spectrum and it's got rubber cap, I'm like, oh.
You are right. The Atari 800 sold for $1,000, which is the equivalent to $3,500 in today's money.
That's right.
That's a lot of money for an Atari 800.
It's a lot. It's a lot. Good system though. Very good system.
Very C64 like, and that's because Jack Trammell was mostly behind a lot of that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and they had but it was and I do seem to remember there was a lot of very fine Commodore 64 coders that shot their tools that were on the Atari 800, that loved the Atari 800. And of course it was Star Raiders on the Atari 800. There were so many developers that we spoke to on From Bedrooms to Billions that learnt their chops for games on the arcades, but when they saw Star Raiders on the Atari 800, there was a huge number of Atari 800s sold in the UK just for people wanting to play Star Raiders. But it's obviously not a game that I don't know how. I mean, I consider Star Raider. I've got the original cartridge open here, I believe. Yeah, there's an Atari 800, Star Raiders, the original Star Raider. Archer McLean once. He did give it to me. I would say it looks like I stole it from him. But it's a game I think should get a lot more recognition, because it was such an early sandbox game. And sorry, we're going off on tangents again. It's my fault.
Okay.
I wonder, were you aware at that time that Bedroom to Billions will be a huge success? And was that movie the reason you decided to go on with the Amiga Years, and then with the PlayStation, and now with the ZX Spectrum?
I think the answer has to be yes, isn't it? Really?
We just can't. Like I said, it just started off as an idea that we thought, oh, this would be fun to make, and then it just grew out of that. And then, as we were making it, we realised that we wouldn't be able to include as much as we wanted to. And so there's loads of parts in From Bedrooms where we think, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could go into more detail on that?
That's the bit where the Amiga would have come in, wasn't it?
Yeah, so we think, oh, the Amiga, we could tell much more about that. And then we thought, but we can't get it all in a film, so maybe that would be a separate film. And then we look at the Commodore 64 and we think, oh my God, we've got so much that we could do another film just on the C64. We knew we could do another one on the Spectrum. So it's kind of...
we are trying to do one on the C64.
And we are trying to do one on the C64. But it was... it kind of set us off on a road where we thought, oh, there's loads of different areas we can go into. But we wanted to keep going up until the present day, and then we thought, now we can go back and pick out some bits that we want to do, and we thought, well, maybe we thought we'd start with the Spectrum, and then the idea is to do one on the C64 and we have other ideas, but we want to focus specifically on certain machines.
I want to go back to the Amiga at some point as well.
I mean, the Amiga,
there's a lot of
got
unfinished
so much
business
footage.
with that.
Yeah, the A500.
The
Okay,
A500.
so you are thinking up a second one about the Commodore 64 and the second one about the Amiga. Interesting.
Yeah,
that's our thinking, because we just have so much footage that's not been seen, and there's more people that we'd like to interview. And so we thought, we can go back to that, because we can only touch on it in the films.
Because if we wanted to do something, I mean, we've been thinking for some time. We were always thinking Commodore 64 is 40 years old, and it was my machine. Though the key thing that is important for any Spectrum fans listening to this is that I was enjoying the Spectrum as much as the Commodore, because everybody I knew had a Spectrum. I was the only one out of my group of friends that had a Commodore 64, and that was only because my dad got it. So I was in an extremely lucky situation, and I loved that machine to pieces. But I was going around people's houses and playing on the Spectrum all the time. And I think the reason I'm saying that was that the Spectrum itself as a computer, because it was so cheap, because it lowered the barrier of entry so much, Commodore, for example, had to compete. So they had to lower prices as well. It had an effect on so many things, because if you could literally pick up think just when you go back before 1977. Right, so you go back before 1977. Couldn't get a home computer. I know there were kits, and there were, but I'm talking about walking into a shop and getting a pre-assembled home computer in a box, take it home, plug it in, read the manual, and away you go. It was a lot more complicated. It's something we take for granted nowadays.
Right. Yeah.
True, and that is where
PET
Commodore came with the PET machine in 77. Actually.
Was that 77 or 76?
77, I think, right?
77. The PET was first.
Okay.
Yeah. Because 77 is always seen as the start of home computers.
Nobody realizes that the first one was the PET. Everyone always looks at the Apple one.
Yeah.
The Apple
But
one,
it was the PET. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. It's right. It was the availability of the current processors at the time. The chip prices, I think, had come down to something like $25 a chip. So it was it suddenly was, and I think Chuck Peddle and others were looking at it from about 1973, 74, and knowing that things are going to come down, and we better have a system ready. And Leonard Trammell told me, we were working on another project a couple of years ago, and he said to me that Chuck, he was there when Chuck gave his dad the pitch about a home computer and his dream for home computers, that eventually it'd be in everyone's home. I know a lot of creators get that attributed to them, so I'm not suggesting Chuck was the very, very first, but there were people in that era that had that dream of wouldn't it be amazing if we could make home computing cheap enough so that people could, if they wanted to, could grasp it. And of course children ended up doing that. And games was just an entry to it. It was so much more than just games, and I think that's another thing that perhaps people could miss. We enjoyed typing listings in. I mean, we enjoyed so much about it.
The magazines. I'd just sit there. I'd spend an entire day lying on my front on the floor, staring at my mum and dad's TV with the Spectrum and just typing in all day, and I loved it. And I remember so well the day that I went with my mum and dad and my brother to get my Spectrum. It's just magical. I absolutely love it. It's just one of those really lovely memories, and opening it up and thinking, wow, what can I do with this? It was I love it. Like I say, one of them great memories. I guess like when your dad brought home your C64.
Yeah, he said, do you want to come to the I remember, because I said to him, I think the 16 had just come out. I might be wrong on that, but I remember I certainly knew about the Commodore 64, and I knew he was going to work for Music Sales that had a contract with Commodore. So I said, Dad, any way you could get a computer? And he said, I can hardly go into work on my first day and get a computer, can I, Anthony? It's going to take several weeks, maybe. We'll see what happens. So I literally had no expectations at all. They were gone. And then that night, when he came home, he said, do you want to come out to the back of the car, help me out with something? So I was like, oh, what's it going to be? Went out, and there it was, 64, in its original packaging over there. Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? You open it up, it's the manual, you start to, and it brings you into that world.
Yeah.
I mean, this the C16 was actually, according to Bill Hurt, when I interviewed him, he said that was more a thing in East Europe.
Yeah, there was I can even remember the advert in the UK that we had. I think it was a school kid, and he was sitting there, and I think the price was $139.99. I seem to remember that from the ad. It was a sort of a, and of course, what was his name? Blast. Oh, we interviewed him for the Amiga Years. He was very proficient in the C16. He did Lotus. What's wrong with my brain? This is what happens to me. See,
Lotus.
He did Kickstart 2. Please don't make me use Moby Games while I'm on this.
Kickstarter 2.
Sean Southern.
Yeah.
And I didn't look at anything else. It finally came back. And Andrew Morris. So they magnetic fields. So Sean was very proficient in the C16. He made it sing unlike many others. He was amazing.
Yeah, I think the 16 was pretty big in the UK. I know that because it shared a lot of qualities with the Spectrum. You know, like the lack of sprites. The games look awful similar because, you know, with the 64 you're using sprites and this and that. With that, it's mostly character driven, and you have those color fields where, like, you know, your guy changes color as he walks over that way. You know, it's like there's a lot of, like, when you look at the games, there's a lot of similarity between them.
What year did it come out, the 16 in the UK? Is that of interest?
That's a good question.
Probably 83 or 84. 84.
Were they around that early? Oh yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
84.
It was released release date was 1984. Yep.
Yep.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Well remembered.
Yeah, so it was an attempted. I'll have to obviously check on this, but it was obviously an attempt to try and knock into the put a dent in Spectrum sales, and it failed.
It was
certainly in that respect.
Directly at the Spectrum and the TI 99-4.
Yeah. Though you'd think about it, though, the Spectrum would have been established for 2 years, 2 years plus at that point, selling for 130 odd quid. And I'm trying to work out why a £140 machine 2 years later would actually be a competition for it. But then again, Amstrad released that console, didn't they, in 1990? That was an 8-bit console. I seem to remember in 1990. It was sort of 4 years too late.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Well, and Commodore was putting out the C64 games console thing back in
the GS
early 90s.
The game system.
Yeah. They're like, oh yeah, Nintendo, we've got one too, and Nintendo's like, yeah, we're not doing that anymore.
Have you seen that before? Yeah. Only a decade earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot about that.
I mean, the thing is, they actually used units that were on sale in Norway and Denmark, and actually made them real Commodore 64 again afterwards, because they didn't sell. So actually those units got recycled back then, which is also why the GS is pretty rare nowadays, because it didn't sell so well.
I'm pretty sure.
Couldn't understand why it wouldn't have sold so well. No keyboard, and most of the games needing a keyboard.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I mean, actually, I got one, and I got one also with those cartridges shipped with it, and
one of the cartridges they shipped with it needed the keyboard.
Exactly. No. Yes. Exactly. Yes. They had a version of Terminator 2. Or was it Robocop?
I think it was Robocop.
Don't remember. Don't remember.
That fine Commodore marketing department.
And I remember that you had to it was a collection, a music collection, and the game, and you had to press the K key to actually select the game, and you couldn't because there was no keyboard.
And if I needed an anecdote to explain Commodore to somebody, that's it, because that's just like, the chef's kiss. That's Commodore in a nutshell right there.
I might better tell you another story here, but I might have some of the details wrong. So you or some of your listeners might shoot me down for this, but I can't remember if it was Atari or Commodore. All right, I'll have to check my notes, but I'm trying to sort of I'm making this up as I go. So somebody, and I'm going to, for the minute, say Commodore. So, you know, I just want to forewarn everybody.
It's 50-50,
I've probably got I might have the company wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was the VIC-20. That there was something they needed to get it into the what's the huge catalog they have in America, in the States, that really big catalog,
Like the Sears catalog.
The Sears catalog, yeah.
and it had to, and to get in the catalog, the stock had to be there by 1st of September or something, either 1st of October or 1st of September, and they had this huge production run of VIC-20s, and then there was an error on the board. There was something which basically meant they wouldn't work. So someone said, just ship the empty boxes, don't worry, because then we'll recall them in end of October and just swap them for the correct stock. And that's what they did. And apparently they did it for almost every year after that, because there was always some production issue or something. But this was, I'm sure it was VIC-20.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, I think it was the VIC-20. But that whole concept of just shipping empty boxes to simply get into the Sears catalog.
There's so much of that. The sparkle effect on the C64, where they just changed rather than fix the problem, they just changed the color to blue so that you wouldn't see the sparkling.
Yeah,
right.
So, like it still does it. It's just invisible now.
And if anybody knows it's a feature, then that's it.
Yeah.
Actually, I just looked it up. It was indeed Robocop 3 that was re-released for the C64 GS alongside Chase HQ2, which was interesting because the GS shipped with the only joystick on the Commodore 64 that had a second separated fire button.
Oh, really?
So you could press it for boost in Chase HQ2, because on the Commodore 64 you had to press the space key for that.
Yeah, even though on the 64 supported two buttons on the joysticks, and just nothing ever used it.
No,
exactly.
Which is sad because I hate, the one thing I hate about C64 games is up on the joystick to jump.
Yeah.
It's wrong. It's just wrong. Everyone knows that there's a button that you're supposed to push to jump.
And everyone also knows is that if you have to use the space bar in a game, everybody goes, oh. So I still remember in Commando on the Commodore 64 requiring the space bar to throw a grenade, or I think it was in there was some fighting game, I'm trying to remember what it was now, where you had to use space bar to do a kick.
Yeah.
And just, you know, it's where do you position it? Down by your foot so you can use your toe? Because while you've got a joystick to just, what do you use?
Yeah, right.
It never quite well. I'm trying to remember what game that was now.
Or games where it's only keyboard controlled, and so the left half of the keyboard is for player 1, the right side of the keyboard is for player 2. And it goes from being a friendly game where you're just staying to your side of the keyboard into a slapping match.
Renegade.
Just leaning over. Yeah.
Renegade was the game that needed the space bar. I've just remembered on the C64. Yeah. So yeah. Thank God. Yeah. It's coming. It's coming in, but it's coming in delayed action tonight.
Yes. Interesting. Yeah, well, so let's talk a bit, perhaps, about your upcoming movie, ZX Spectrum. Yeah. Anything that you already can tell without spoiling too much?
Well, we've only just launched the Kickstarter for it. We launched it about 10 days ago, and we just weren't quite sure what the feel would be from the Spectrum community. And I think one of the things is we do get a lot of fan mail from Commodore 64 and Commodore fans that want us to do something for the Commodore. So we were moving both projects forward, and we knew that one we'd have to start first, and there's a lot to sort out with the Commodore one at the moment. So we sort of thought, right, let's focus completely on the Spectrum one, and let's try to make a film that would basically interest anyone who's got interest in old games or home computing, because the Spectrum itself is a wonderful, a British treasure as we call it. But what we started to understand was actually how popular it was in other countries, and in many cases due to it being cloned. So we sort of thought, okay, there is actually potentially quite a large audience for this that's going to have an interest in quite a quirky but certainly very, very interesting story about how a computer went through a series of evolution from MK14 right the way through eventually through proof of concept to the this 48K one, isn't it?
Yeah.
16K's over there. To the 48K Spectrum, and we sort of wanted to explain, make a film that sort of showed how so many people, certainly in the UK and Europe, got and the world, as I say, once we learned about the clones, got into coding and programming simply because of how cheap it was, and that meant that it was a viable option for their parents to invest in it, and it brought the computer into the home. And we've set the Kickstarter off, and we've got what we think is a nice piece of art, and we've got some support from Oliver Frey, and who's generously lent us some of his artwork, and John Harris, who did the famous ZX Spectrum manual, ZX81 and ZX Spectrum manual covers.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, interestingly, perhaps we can talk about that. Why is it, by the way, that in UK, I think it was also the case for the Spectrum, that tape games was more a thing because compared to discs, I think it was mainly because of the price point. I don't know if tape games for the Spectrum were also as cheap as for the Commodore 64, or if that was a Commodore 64 only thing.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting question. When we were making From Bedrooms, we discovered that basically everybody's thought was just to back up to tape and to produce tapes, because tapes were cheap, tapes could be sold. And I mean that it was a little bit like that in the States to a certain degree, a tape or a disc in a bag. But I think in the UK it was more the availability of being able of cassette tapes were sort of plentiful. And I think that we could genuinely put up perhaps with 5 to 6 minutes. I have to be honest with you, I'm looking forward to actually learning more about why that was the case in the UK, because as a schoolboy myself in the UK, I had to buy a game. I had to save my dinner money up, and it was a lot quicker. If you were like, for example, I remember a game I saved up for on the Commodore 64. So we keep coming back to the Commodore 64. But, was Hero, which I've got somewhere. But you remember Hero from Activision,
Sure.
John Van Ritzen's game, and it took me 10 days of no lunches to earn $9.99 to walk into this game shop and buy it. It was available on disc, but it was $19.99, so it would have been. And I sort of and it was a single load anyway. Once I was relieved to know, but they were all so much more expensive. Usually 5, 7, sometimes 15, 17, 18 pounds.
I mean, I just connected my tape player to my Spectrum,
and
and you used to have to adjust the screw, the little precision screw.
The adjustment of the read-write head, right?
Yeah, with little thing, but I don't remember. See, with the Spectrum, it was always.
It could just simply be that the Spectrum sort of being a hit first established a tape-based market, and Commodore, even though they had a disk drive which was more expensive than the Commodore 64 itself, it was just too much of a novelty. But why would that then be the case in the US? And I mean, if I'm actually asking that question, I'd be interested to know what was the price difference.
So you think probably it was a Spectrum that introduced the tape being cheaper first? Could be.
I don't know that for certain.
Oh, I don't know.
Actually, I made a mistake here. That screw wasn't to adjust the head. The screw was to adjust the speed of the tape motor. I was making a mistake here.
Yeah, because the sound, you could always tell whether your game was loading or not. And if it wasn't, just adjust that screw very slightly.
Right,
loading, and then you'd sit there for about 6 minutes while it loaded. But but I only ever remember tape for me.
Yeah, I mean,
you never had a disk drive connected to your Spectrum?
No, I only ever had all my games. Oh yeah, all tape. And this game, I always go on and on at Anthony about this. I love this game.
Chamber of Horrors.
It's called Chamber of Horrors, and I bought it in a sweet shop. And I've never found anyone that's ever played it before. I mean, maybe just people didn't like it. I loved it. I found it so difficult. You got it working for me, didn't you?
Unfortunately, yeah, I did.
I thought it was a brilliant game. It was a very good game.
I think we've all got those games that you aren't classics, but there's something about them that maybe
It's a classic
a
for me.
situation in your life at the time that just made you feel better, or whatever it would be. Sometimes we've all got those guilty pleasures, like music. There's certain tracks that other people can't stand. And I think, yes, I did get Chamber of Horrors working for you, and it was a.
I think
It was a shocker.
Yeah.
That's true.
It was hard, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
It was
Totally
hard.
understood.
I'm wondering how much playtesting actually went into it
Yeah,
to
well,
determine if that'll do,
okay,
or whether.
Yeah.
So much bugs in it, or
Where is it?
Mm.
or what do you mean?
That's the game. Sorry, did you ask what's in the box?
Yeah, I mean, because you said there was not much playtesting in
See,
it,
look
and
at
I
that.
thought like because it was so bug ridden or something, or was it just bad
No.
gameplay or what?
It was just a really hard game to play, but whether
That literally looks like exactly as
You
many
see, look,
games were back then.
that is like
That's
new,
been stuck
that
on
game.
by the distributor, by the by Omega themselves, I'm assuming, because the label's wonky. So it's straight on one side, but it's wonky on the other.
1984.
1984.
Well, I once bought unopened copy of Forbidden Forest, and
Really?
those labels look like they were put on unevenly by a student or something in the quick
Yeah.
carry, and the manual was photocopied in a bad quality. And this was an original game you could buy from the store. So I especially the British publisher. Sometimes the smaller publisher. Forbidden Forest was from Cosme. That was really bad quality. It was
Paul
so
Norman's
bad.
game. Paul Norman's game, wasn't it? Paul
Exactly.
Norman? Yeah.
Exactly. The famous Forbidden Forest from Cosme, from Paul Norman, yeah. And and those British publishers especially had such a bad reproduction quality that it looked like somebody who did it at home. you know.
That's exactly where
That's
often
where
they
it
were
started with
done.
the mail order, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing. I remember Jeff Minter saying to me that he's boxes and boxes in his house, and they're putting the labels on themselves, putting them in and then out because they've got to get an X number of thousand out by a certain point. No one's making games back then, and
Maybe that's where it came from, all tapes, because they're cheaper, weren't they?
Yes,
And easier to do at home and post. I don't know. We will answer this question.
Yes, I'd like to know where
Yeah.
because that's the other thing. I remember Interceptor Software as well. They got a tape replicating machine. I'm sure of it. We've got some footage somewhere of the owner of the company talking about it. Richard. Oh, blimey, I can't remember his surname now. But there you go. I told you my brain's wearing out. But sorry, where did we even get to? I have no idea.
Yeah, well, I mean, talking about the tapes, that is actually the reason why many games in their disc version are very rare nowadays. I remember looking for many years for an affordable copy of Last Ninja on disc.
No chance.
And Last Ninja System 3, I actually got it for like £120.
Yeah.
I thought like, okay, you can't get it cheaper than that. In a perfect condition, in a clamshell version. I was like, okay, this is wonderful. And here's the thing. You totally could see that System 3 didn't care much about the disk drive, because the loader they used, apart from the copy protection, the spindle motor, the stepper motor of the drive was constantly turning. So
Really?
It was never stopping. So it was actually a drive killer. And I also bought a loose disc version of the NTC version that was published by Activision. So what Activision actually was doing is they removed the whole fast loader mechanism, put in their own mechanism with their own copy protection, and even they introduced a system that automatically detects whether it runs on NTSC or PAL machines. That means the American version is a better version than the original British version by System 3.
Wow. Yeah.
So if you get a version and you don't want to kill your 1541, especially the first version with the internal power supply that tends to overheat, get the American version because they have a better disk drive loader in it.
That's good to know. I think it's hard enough to get Last Ninja. I think I've got a copy.
There's one in here somewhere.
Yeah, I think I've got a copy of it somewhere. Yeah, I have got one somewhere.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to be paranoid, thinking, "Where's it gone?"
Oh, you have. I don't know where it is.
I'm not going to keep showing you the back of my head, but yeah, it's there's definitely. Yeah, I think I've got quite a few disc versions up there. I've got these are all Commodore 64 discs up here. So I've got, and that's the thing, they were rare. I think one of the rarest I've got, in terms of just simply at the time in the UK, was this is original Beachhead II on disc.
Wow.
Which still got the manual, still got the disc. That was one of the very, very few games I actually saved. There you go. I probably went without lunch for 15 days to get that one. That's why I lost weight in the 80s. It was saving up for my games. But I've got a few disc versions, and I do seem to remember as the 80s went on and it got like 87, 88, you could start getting second-hand games by that point, and then you could start picking up disc games at the PCW, some of the big trade shows, and you could pick up disc games for like a $5.
I got them Zork at a car boot sale.
Yeah, these are disc Zorks.
Yeah.
Can you see that from where I am?
Well, very tiny, but I understand where you are going to. Yeah.
I found them in a car boot sale.
There's some. We've got a lot of Scott Adams games as well on. I don't know if you know Scott Adams, but we've got quite a few Scott Adams games on disc. But that's more through just wanting to collect them. But yeah, I think I'm going to assume it was probably the influx of tape-based tape-based products because of the Spectrum. But that's one of the things that's the how genuine we are in terms of when we make these documentaries. We try to go into them. If we don't know, then we want to find out, and that kind of means we come at it in a slightly different way. I should know that really, actually, but
interesting here. You mentioned Beachhead II, right? Beachhead II is a special game because most people don't know, but the original tape recorder for the Commodore 64 that was actually coming from the pad, and that had no counter in it.
Right.
At least in America. In Europe, the first the first data set in Europe actually had a counter, but the first American version didn't. And Beachhead 2 is one of those rare tape games where it doesn't really allow you to play the game if you don't have a counter on your tape drive, because the first thing before you play the game is the game asks you to write down on a piece of paper the counter numbers of each level. So
really?
So that when you complete a level or you lose a level, it can tell you go to counter this, go to counter that. So you actually had to first, write down all the numbers. And that means that the Americans, when they had one of those early data sets, they couldn't play the game because they didn't know where to rewind or forward the tape to which position.
Fascinating. That's fascinating. Wow. I think that's the thing, because it allowed you to play. You could play the levels individually, couldn't you? You could actually, like the Summer Games series. Yeah, you could just visit those. Obviously, we live in the UK where we used to multi-load on cassette. It was part of it, and it seemed to be that nearly every US game I can remember, so many US Gold games that were where they were importing American titles into the UK, I think were multi-load. All the Summer Games series, Winter Games, all of them were multi-load. But that's fascinating.
But mostly it would just say, turn the tape and rewind completely.
That's it.
But Beachhead 2 didn't do that. Yeah.
Technically a broken game then.
Well, if you are unlucky to have one of those early tape decks, then yes. But most of them have the counter, of course.
Yeah. Rob Hubbard told me about a game. I've got it on a deleted scene actually from Bedrooms, where I can't remember what game it was. Where it was, he got a Commodore 64, and I think before he even started composing music, he he got this game and it wasn't that good, and he said he just got obsessed with completing it, and he got near the end, and then there was a jump or there was something that he couldn't do.
It was a girl's name or something. Oh yeah, I remember.
Pandora.
Oh, I can't remember.
It was a girl's name. That's right. And then he couldn't make this jump, or he couldn't get to this bit, and it drove him mad, and he nearly threw the game down in disgust. When he eventually started coding, he took the game to pieces and found out there was no way past that bit. The code just stopped. The game just stopped, and it was just assumed that you would give up. So the developer probably just got bored of the game and made the jump impossible, so that you could never make it. And then, but by that point, you've probably had a game's worth. Oh, it doesn't matter. I think there was an ocean game, wasn't there, where there was a ladder that was impossible to get to. I'm trying to remember what it was. An arcade conversion. My brain tonight. Sorry.
Well, Ocean isn't really known for good conversions sometimes.
No, their quality did drastically improve though, as things progressed. But yeah, they bought the Imagine label, didn't they? They bought the Imagine label separate and then used it, I think, from what I can recall, for arcade conversions. Sort of kept that label separate for a while. But I digress again.
Yes.
if you have so many deleted scenes, perhaps you should do a new movie just compiled of those deleted scenes.
We have thought about it, but in a funny sort of ways. There will be some of those. I don't want to call them deleted scenes because they never got used in the first place. But I would say probably the best thing to say is the pool of rushes that we amassed.
They're going to come out within our film. So like, there's loads of footage that we didn't use that covers the spectrum, game making of various things. So we want to use that. We do want to bring that out within this film. And the same will be for when we do one on the C64. We'll release some of the footage that's not been seen.
But it'll be part of the film itself.
So it's all part of the film. Or if it's, it might be a really good extra. If someone's telling a really good story, I think, well, it won't work in the film, but it'll be on the disc as well. So, yeah, we do want to get it out, but we like to get it out within a product that, that we're doing. So if it's a film about the C64, we'll put the extras in there to show it. Because, yeah, there's tons. There's so much. It's lovely. It's so much wonderful footage.
I mean, we've obviously got so much stuff, so many composers for the C64 we've accumulated over the years. Chris Holzbeck, Hubbard, Martin Galway, Ben Dalglish, who's sadly passed away. And
but so little of their interviews have been used, because obviously when the films that we've done where you've got everyone talking and that, you only maybe use about, at best, 10-15 minutes of maybe a 3-hour interview.
But we do have another project, which you are the first place in the universe to hear about it. We're launching something in the near future. It'll be out before Christmas. Totally separate from the ZX Spectrum film that we're doing and the plans we have for the Commodore 64 and Amiga. It's called Cabin Fever, and this is the star of it effectively, because in this cabin is a huge collection of games, but also movie memorabilia, comics, artwork, lots and lots of things that we've got, signed things, all sorts of stuff. And so many people have said to us, when we're making these films, we do all the capturing and other things for them in this room. And that's why all the stuff in here is made up of our collection of stuff, but also things people have brought. John Hare came in and brought some stuff, and all sorts of people have dropped stuff in this room over the years. So we decided to make a show out of it. And awesome. While we're doing some of the capturing for things and talking about games and talking about music and other things, and it's called Anton Nick's Cabin Fever. And if you like, depending on obviously your time, I'll send you a short segment if you want to actually potentially incorporate it in your show. And it'll be the first time anybody has ever seen it. And with the first episode, it's Commodore 64. So it'll be a little bit about that. But that's been a lot of fun to do, and that's kind of accumulated over about the last 18 months of things that we've been filming in here. And we just set the cameras off in this room and we just recorded it, and it started to...
It's a bit more like conversational, if you like, so it's just a bit of gameplay and then talking about the games that we're playing. So, yeah, it's quite good fun.
I have no idea if it's going to be of any, it's one of them things where you sort of just see this might be of interest to people or it might not, but there's a lot of insight into how we put stuff together. That's one thing that people would learn from it. And that's kind of what we've got coming up.
Yeah,
I guess that is a bit like Brian Becknell when he did his Commodore Rise and Fall on the Edge in 2005. He didn't know that his book on the rise and fall of Commodore would kickstart a whole series of books based on retro computing and stuff.
That's right.
So I guess you never know where things go. You just do what you think is a good idea to do.
Yeah.
That's quite right. Yeah, and you just follow it. I mean, anybody that's making something, whether they're making a game or whether they're like with the Spectrum Next, there's been all sorts in the last few years, a sort of connected love to this, and that's another thing, by the way. When we were making From Bedrooms to Billions, people such as yourself and other members of the scene reached out to us because they were interested, because they were pleased that somebody was looking to try and do something about it. And from our point of view, we were excited and interested by the shared mutual love we had for the subject, but also a natural feeling of doing something that people are going to really enjoy. And that's kind of what we want. When we go into a Kickstarter, we're very genuine about it. We're not. I think people get lost with Kickstarter sometimes and think you've already got all the stuff done and you're just selling pre-orders. And that's not what Kickstarter's really about in spirit. And that's not what we're doing. We haven't made the film yet. We literally, when you back one of our projects, you'll learn about it as we make it. Except with this particular one on the ZX Spectrum, it's coming out whatever happens for next Christmas. We want it out and done in a year. We don't want any reputations of taking longer every time.
Yeah.
When we did all our Doctor Who stuff and things like that in the 2005 and 6 and 7, we used to knock out about 7 or 8 little documentaries a year. We exec produced a lot of them, but they were going out through the BBC and Channel 4 and things like that. So we were used to getting a lot of content out. With these From Bedrooms films, it's like a Hoover. It just you get sucked down in making them so in depth and trying to expand them out. So for this film, we want it to be 80 minutes. It's going to be voiceover driven, but still with a lot of the things that our films are known for, but we want it to be 80 minutes, so it's a sit down and view in one go. And then all the featurettes that come with it, all the making ofs and other things. Of course, there'll be special features on there, but we want the primary film to just be 80 minutes. And that's the same with the Commodore 64 one we've got planned. We're happy if people want to see us to produce 3 hours of stuff. And my word, have we got stuff on Commodore on the Amiga so much more. But we want there to be a primary film that's a bit shorter, so that you can just sit and enjoy it at that level in one sitting.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's me not being able to sit down and watch 2.5 hour films all the time.
Yeah.
That's right.
And also a good point where you said that with Kickstarter you're not pre-ordering something. No, you are investing in an idea, and it could also fail. So it's not really ordering in a way. You are participating in the financial backing of a product and hope that the financial backing was successful in the end. And the good thing about your movies compared to many other Kickstarters is actually people who missed the Indiegogo or Kickstarter or whatever, they can actually buy the movie afterwards from your homepage.
Yes, though this particular one, I think people will have to understand then this one won't be quite the same. There will be a version that will come out, but it's not going to be this version. Because one of the things that we get is that people don't quite get is when we made From Bedrooms to Billions, there was a lot of comments saying I'll pick it up on Amazon in a few months' time, but we've never made this version available again. That's why they sell £250 on eBay and silly stupid prices.
So we try and keep our Kickstarter ones specifically for the people that have backed us, and then they get this unique copy. And then if we do release them onto Amazon and that, they're not the same version. They haven't got reversible covers. They haven't got the Oliver Frey artwork.
So if you're a collector, you want obviously to try and get the original one. But the From Bedrooms films have a distributor, so obviously that's they've got a different cover and everything else, and that's brilliant. But what we try to do for the Kickstarter ones is load it up with lots of stuff.
Make them collectible, you know. So they're a bit different. They have the slip cases, they have reversible cover, different artwork. So yeah, just to make them different, because we think if everyone's come in there and they've really supported us.
We keep looking over there, by the way. We've got a picture of it up there. That's why we
like our poster.
So it looks like what we're looking at all the time.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I remember the Amiga Years actually came in a metal box, if I'm not
No,
mistaken.
it was,
Oh, it might be the slipcase.
it came in
yeah.
it came in a slipcase.
Oh,
And that's,
slipcase, that was it.
Yeah, so
Right.
that was an Oliver Frey drew it for us, and yeah, on the back of a Giant. Yeah, that was a nice. That came with a nice slipcase, and we also did. I can't. This one's sealed at the moment. This is one of the rare Kickstarter ones. So these are the ones you can't buy. We did a nice. I think was it 12-page. There's a nice colour 12-page booklet in there as well, which was lovely because we were given some pictures by Dave Needle and Dale Luck, and that was I think it was the A1000, the first one that rolled off the production line, was in Dave Needle's house, because obviously Dave sadly passed away only a few months after we interviewed him.
Yeah, I
So
heard.
it was it was quite a shock when RJ told us. So it was it felt very special. Of course, he told us some quite amazing things, which we put in the film. He gave us, he wanted it all in there. Certainly about the Atari story about faking the chip diagrams.
Still a lot that's not in there as well. So.
Oh my word, yes.
Yeah.
So I think probably the big thing about the Amiga Years is obviously we were telling a hardware story to a point, and then we wanted to show the game development side of things about what then happened. So it's almost like two parts, that film. It's quite deliberate. And I think some people were really into the hardware story, the history of Commodore type part of the story, and whereas we always will lean towards game development. So we wanted to see, once the Amiga was out, how did it affect game development? So I think personally, what I would want to see next from us in terms of the Amiga is more of a continuation of that Commodore story and the later versions of the Amiga. Certainly one thing we did edit up, which we never use, it's about an hour long, is the story of the A500. And of course we've got Chris Holzbeck, we've got so many people talking about it, but it would have made the film 4 hours long. So no chance. So that's something we've always wanted to do something with. If anybody out there's listening to this and they're interested in any of the films that we're thinking about doing, just sign up. We can just write to B2B at graciousfilms.com, and we'll put you on the mailing list, and you can stay up to date on what we've got coming up.
Awesome. I wonder, by the way, why did you decide to go for a PlayStation documentary after the Amiga Years?
Do you want to answer that?
Oh, it was.
It's only because I'm talking all the time. So.
I think it was more because we wanted to come right up to the present day, didn't we? That was more of our.
Well, from bedrooms to
thinking,
billions, there were two things, wasn't it? That came from that first film was the Amiga kept coming up,
Yeah.
and the PlayStation kept coming up,
Yeah.
constantly, because they were massive effects. The cartridge era, the 16-bit cartridge era, as popular as it was, actually had a negative drag effect on Europe, and certainly the shovelware era crept in. And then when the PlayStation came along, it was kind of almost like going back to the home computer days again, with a lower barrier of entry. There was still a barrier to entry for the PlayStation. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting you could just pick one up from down the road and start programming.
It's discs as well,
yeah,
isn't it?
But it was PC-based development.
Yeah.
You could work with a PC, so it kind of did go back to. Whereas you want to hear some of the stories we've heard about working with the Saturn, or working with trying to work with the Mega Drive. They did get their heads around it, obviously, and there was a lot of great development from European and of course US studios for the Genesis Mega Drive and the SNES. But I think when the PlayStation came out, again, it felt like a story we needed to tell, because it affected. There was a massive ripple
Kind of
through
like
the development community.
Like a turning point, if
Yes.
you like. That's what I mean. It's like
Yeah.
if you put all three of our films together, there's so many areas you can go off and tell different stories. And I think that's kind of what we are doing now. It's going back and thinking, oh, there's an avenue to go and explore. There's an avenue.
So
But that's kind of what happened when we were with the PlayStation Revolution. It was like, I think that's a good angle to go off on. Let's discuss the PlayStation and the impact that had. But then we've had people saying to us, you haven't done Xbox or, Saturn. Yeah, there's lots of things. And we think, oh, well, we could. Because, like I said, with all the interviews that we've got so much material. So you never know. We may go off and do that as well.
I mean, if there was enough support, we'd probably, it's something where we might even there's a lot of people obviously doing YouTube now. This is part of the reason why we decided to do Cabin Fever, because we kind of like the idea of getting output out a bit quicker. So Cabin Fever is a way of us doing stuff and getting it out a bit quicker, and people also sort of getting a feel for the way we make our films and stuff. And I think that was one of the things. We've also thought about Patreon, possibly, and maybe we could put some of our episodic things into Patreon. And if people want to watch our stuff, we could release something every couple of weeks in a half-hour segment. Maybe that's something we could. We've certainly got the material to do that, but it would be the only way we could really do that is if we were able to convert enough people into Patreon simultaneously so we could afford to do it. And that's the thing. We actually do this for a living.
All food for thought.
Yeah,
really.
We've made films now for 20 years, more than 20 years now. So it's kind of what we do. So that's the beauty of that original From Bedrooms film, is it gave us the freedom to make it because there was such support to do it. Because if we didn't get the support, we couldn't have afforded to make it. And
I think that's why we enjoy Kickstarter as well, is because you get to actually engage with the people that are watching your stuff, and that's quite nice. You know, I like that. And we get lots of people asking us various things. Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? And that's really nice. We like that because it gives us little ideas, and people will tell us little stories. Think, oh, I haven't heard that before. That'd be really good to include that. And we like that. So that's why, although Kickstarter can be quite nervous because you think, oh, God, hopefully people want to see this made. It's just nice to see that people are getting behind us and supporting us, which is lovely.
Yeah, I remember like the demo scene section in the Amiga Years. That was a pleasure to do, and we had like another hour of that. I mean,
Awesome.
it could have done a film just on the demo scene.
Maybe we will.
Just to ask you, the difference, as I said, between Kickstarter and non-Kickstarter versions. So it's basically bonus material that is missing and different artwork or different covers.
Or the packaging.
It'll be the packaging and also what's available on the disc. So the version that will come out after. All we are concerned about is making the film and producing enough copies to cover the backers. We're not. And then we move on to another project. And then if we get a distributor, they can distribute it. And it'll be a cut down version of it. So like there's a special edition of From Bedrooms to Billions. There used to be. And now there's only a standard version of it. So there's people out there that have got that 6-hour version of From Bedrooms, which has got 2 discs on it. But you can't buy that anymore.
Yeah, so we only fulfill for our Kickstarter.
I have to admit, I don't really remember which versions I've got, because I've backed so many Kickstarters in my life in the last 9 years that I really can't back all the projects at once. And
I
at
think
some point,
everything we've ever done, I'm pretty sure you've always. I just remember you always having something posted out to you. I think you've always supported us.
Yeah.
But you've always been there. I've always known of you since we've started out. So even that alone has been supportive. So yeah, it's
really well.
Yeah.
Well, you know the thing is, when you make something like we do with Scene World, you don't really know what people think about it outside of your own bubble, and you don't really know if people know about you. It's just sometimes we hear about it. Like you were like, I think you were replying within 10 minutes to that email saying like, yes, of course we can make an interview. So I was like, okay, he seems to know us, so I don't have to write a big introduction about who we are and what we do and stuff.
It's so relieving as well. Well, obviously I did know all about you, and I've listened over the years. Not every episode, but certainly. People like Andrew Fisher, and you've had some pretty amazing guests on. I think that's the thing. You've got to keep trailblazing and just keep going for the biggest guests you can, because people do like to talk about what they're interested in. I mean, I've certainly thoroughly enjoyed this chat, and I was actually concerned, and this is a voice. I'm saying this to that Commodore 64 Amiga backer out there that's thinking, I couldn't back a ZX Spectrum film. I couldn't do that. But back it for us, because we want to tell stories about that era of home computing, and we want to keep doing that, and we can't do it unless the community supports us in that. And we want this film to do well, just like all the others. And there's going to be stuff about Commodore in there. There's going to have to be some stuff slipped in there. But A little bit, I promise. But yeah, it's
well, I mean,
hopefully-
basically, we cover everything, you know. Doesn't really matter. I mean, if you think about it, PC DOS and DOS retro gaming scene is growing a lot in the last years. So basically, you could make a movie about DOS games, you know.
Yeah.
Isn't it crazy when you think about it, how things can suddenly become retro? You know, I remember in 2006, the idea that the PlayStation PS1 could be considered a retro machine, and now we're thinking that we're putting the 360 into that, the Xbox 360. The PS3 is a retro system. In certain ways, the PS4 will be. I mean, it's just just crazy how things come out, and that's why I don't tend to use the term retro, because I sort of think it's it's a collective. You know, we can have this debate all day about whether games are art or whether they're this or entertainment or whatever it is, but I still think that if somebody's sitting down designing something, they're creating a piece of art, because art affects you. Even if you hate it, it's affected you in some way. It's like art does. So I've always felt that they lean toward their entertainment, but their art. And you know, when people go to art galleries or go and listen to music, they're doing it to be entertained. They're doing it because they enjoy it. So I still think it comes under that. But I'm not here to prove whether games are art or not. But we do very much like to champion the cause. And we've always had such a soft spot for programmers over the years. The great, I think, programmers themselves, coders, are misunderstood in many ways. And I think often they're just internally frustrated, because they kind of want people to know really how clever they are, because they are very clever. So yeah, it's we kind of always had a soft spot for coders as well along the way. Try and champion that. Yeah.
I mean the things about a new system coming out, like lately the Switch in 2017, is breaking the barriers and boundaries of what is possible. For example, Doom and Wolfenstein 2, to port it on the Switch, that was deemed to be impossible. Similar to when Lemmings was released, it was said that this can't be done on the Commodore 64 until it was finally done. You know? And there are many examples on the ZX Spectrum, for example. Power Drift, or think about Street Fighter or something. Those games are pretty good on the Spectrum, you know, despite the technical challenges, you know. And another famous example is Chase HQ, which is just horrible on the Commodore 64, because they ported the Spectrum version to it without any modification whatsoever. So
I didn't know about that. About what, it was just ported straight over?
Yeah, that's true.
Wow, that's interesting.
So it's brutally slow, and it's awful.
Of course, Midnight Resistance is very good on the Spectrum as well. Jim Bagley's game. It's that runs really, really beautifully. I think that's the thing as well. Is I don't. When we were kids, there was Playground Wars, and there was My Computer's Better Than Yours. It did go on, and Commodore users would laugh at the color clash on the Spectrum, and Spectrum users would laugh at the chunky sprites on the Commodore 64. But then the Commodore 64 users could always come back and say, "We've got the music, we've got the musicians. You know, you don't have that." But that eventually changed. Spectrum obviously did eventually end up having decent music on it, and everything, as the later iterations proved.
Right.
And I think it just one drove the other. So I think the Spectrum itself, you could create beautiful art and high resolution, high definition artwork, and be very dainty with your artwork on the Spectrum. I was talking to Mark R. Jones today, ex Ocean, and he was talking to me actually about though he used to do stuff for the Commodore 64 and the Spectrum, and he just said for him personally, the Spectrum was just, as an artist, was just easier to draw for. It was just because you could go in and be so much more dainty with it, but of course you had the issue with colours, so you had to then be more creative. I think you just accepted it when you had a system like that back then. You knew its drawbacks, and you kind of just turned a blind eye to them. And of course, we did have on the 64 some quite stunning beautiful games that came out, that continued to come out. What was it? Project Firestart? I think that was quite a late release.
That's
89?
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, stunning.
Yeah.
But there's a game, funny enough, we're talking about that, when developers get so good at a system, like 10 years later. What was the game that Doug Newbeyer did for the Atari 2600? Damn, what was it called? Doug Newbeyer did Star Raiders, did a game for the 2600 in like 1986. It was one of its last ever releases, and it's stunning. Oh, there'll be people shouting out now the name of it. I can't remember. As I said, I can. Should we do it? Should we just look it up? Because I
never mind. Yeah, you can if you like.
Just, if I may.
But interesting that you don't know about Chase HQ.
I didn't know about that. Not that it was converted. We've interviewed the creators. It's probably in. They're both in From Bedrooms to Billions.
Want me to click?
So if we look up that their transcript, I bet they probably talk about it in there. Yeah, he did.
There are other examples. Heavy Driving is another example, and the third example would be Karnov, which is an arcade machine conversion. But the special thing about Karnov is they ported the Spectrum version 100%, including the color clash and the color palettes.
Yeah, we did have
Spectrum to the Commodore 64.
Yeah, we had that. I remember School Days. I'm sure School Days was converted over from the Spectrum. They never looked great. Spectrum games never worked well on the Commodore 64. Right, here we go. It was called Solaris. Solaris. If you look up Solaris, I know we're totally off on a tangent again. Yeah, I know. Solaris on the Atari 2600 came out in 1986. Creator of Star Raiders, Doug Newbeyer, stunning piece of coding. Just what he was able to get out of that system in '86 was quite amazing, and I love that when developers get to that point where they've just been they know every nuance of the system. They know exactly what they can squeeze out of it, and their brain never stops. Can I just speed it up a bit more? I think that's part of the key of coders as well, is that obsession with knowing you can never truly have perfect code, but you're going to try bloody hard to get it as perfect as you possibly can. And even if you get it perfect in your mind, you'll still think of a way you could perhaps make it better. And good coders were always thinking constantly about, can I just get it a bit faster? Can I get it looking a little bit better? We got the kids, haven't we? So we'll have to draw it. I do hope we've given you some good stuff, by the way.
Awesome.
Yeah. I have no idea what we've talked about. We seem to
a lot. Yeah,
there's a lot.
It's been nice.
It's been really lovely chatting with you, actually, and I'm sorry your co-host had to pop off, but it's do give us a look. It's the Rubber Keyed Wonder, our new film, 40th anniversary of the ZX Spectrum, and it's the Kickstarter's live now. So pop in and support us, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Have a good evening. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.
Nice.
Yes, very good move from the Swede. But watch out, the Russian York chef is always round for the big moments. Oh, what a mess. Fortunately, the German Friegel is here with his singular technique. Ouch.
Remember, like the darts in 180. Is it?
Oh yeah, real wobbly, isn't it? Yeah, that was quite good. 180.
Excellent. Steve Pickford artwork, I believe. Nice. I remember.
Yeah, because it was sort of
throwing. I'm assuming he did the Commodore 64 art as well. Yeah.
Accurate kind of arc of the dart.
The thing is, when you got to the last level, you basically had to match him, and it was only the fact that you threw first that you would win. He threw perfect darts. Every single one.
You just had to be perfect.
Yeah. You literally would win on the basis that you threw before him. That's it.
Gosh, that might be a tiny bit too hard.
180.
I think it's easy on this joint. It's got to be easy on this gamepad.
It was hurting me playing with
Did it again? Waggling your joystick. I remember having to repair the things.
Yeah, well, the old Atari ones were the best. I always thought, in terms of durability.
Yeah.
That's
the one I played.
400, or whatever it was. In fact, there's one behind me.
Atari 2600.
These joysticks.
Yes, that is a careful. It's wired in.
Oh, okay.
It'll pull Beachhead down. There we go. Oh no! I lost
sorry.
vital seconds then.
Oh no!
Trying to save that Atari joystick.
My
Right, let's get
plan
that
came
speed
to
up.
fruition to distract you at the crucial moment.
And now I'm going to get stuck on this upward bend. Oh, come on.
This should be it. So you've got 8 seconds to beat me. Oh no, it depends on your misses. I think you're going to win. You've got less misses. Fewer misses.
Get over the line. There we go.
You did it. Because I had 3:45 as my end time.
Really?
Yeah.
There's 4 seconds in it.
Yeah.
It's a sort of... You sort of think it's going to do... It
That
does.
That was
2001, and then a little bit of... Yeah, and then half of Close Encounters.
That's, you know, the in Close Encounters, that synth that plays that in the film is a real synth. And we were talking earlier about the ARC 2600. It's the 2500, the one that came before it. It's a massive, huge console. And when the guy from ARC turned up with the synth, no one could play it. So it's him in the film that does it on the thing.
You know, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I've got all that stuff there about that film, and I still didn't know that.